Welcome to On The Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsom and I'm here for this weekend's event for the breakdowns and predictions of UFC London. I'm going to be in attendance on Saturday night or Saturday day, Saturday evening, Saturday night. I cannot wait. I'm absolutely stoked. This is also the second time that the UFC has been in the UK since I can ever remember, if I'm being honest. And that's because the last UFC London event was phenomenal. Potentially one of the best cards that we've had of 2022. There has been a couple that rival it, but unbelievable atmosphere, unbelievable event, unbelievable fights, and we get it all again on Saturday night. And like I said, I'm absolutely buzzing for it. But just before we get into the breakdowns, as always, there is going to be a Blaydes AI recap from last weekend at UFC Long Island. Blaydes AI actually dropped a little bit in regards to the overall straight pick prediction percentage last week, but there is a reason for it, and there are still a couple of solid spots as well. So I'll go over all of that in the specific Blaydes AI recap, which is on the Blaydes AI playlist on MMA Play 365's YouTube channel. But right now, we get straight into it. That's why you're all here. We've got the breakdowns, predictions for UFC London, headlined by Curtis Blaydes and Tom Aspinall, and that's exactly where we start. And this is a phenomenal fight. I think it's about as good as it gets in the UFC heavyweight division right now in regards to fights and matchmaking at the top of the division. The winner of this fight likely gets a title shot, in my opinion, because both fighters have been on a tear, both fighters are solid, and both fighters are at the top of the division. Now, it's going to be really interesting from Tom Aspinall's perspective how he deals with Curtis Blaydes, because Tom Aspinall is a very well-rounded fighter. He's a light UFC heavyweight, if that makes sense. So he weighs in a little bit lighter, but because of that, he moves well. His speed's good, his combination's good, and he's a good all-round fighter. Like I've said, he's a good striker. He can wrestle. Like we saw in his last fight as well, he's got a slick submission game. That slick submission game is something that I knew of. You know, his background, his base started with BJJ, and obviously he developed into a striker, and that's what we see more of in the UFC with the striking, apart from obviously his last fight, where he did show his wrestling and his grappling and eventually submitted Volkan as an underdog that I played as well. So Tom Aspinall's a solid fighter, but he's never dealt with or faced a wrestler like Curtis Blaydes in his entire career, inside the UFC or outside the UFC. Curtis Blaydes' wrestling is just on a different level. He's the best wrestler in the UFC heavyweight division, and he's a fighter that's also really been improving in his striking as well. And take his last fight, for example, against Chris Daukaus. A lot of analysts, including myself, were predicting Blaydes to get straight in there with the wrestling, because Daukaus is the lighter UFC heavyweight, the one with quicker hands, the one that's more likely to do better work on the feet. And Curtis Blaydes didn't even bother with a takedown. He won round one with striking. Then he knocked Chris Daukaus out in the second round as well. But then there's been other scenarios. Junior Dos Santos, for example. Blaydes did try and wrestle against Dos Santos, couldn't take him down. Dos Santos' boxing. Yes, Dos Santos was at the end of his career, but his boxing was still sharp, his striking caliber was still sharp, and Curtis Blaydes knocked him out on the feet. So Curtis Blaydes' striking, I think, is very, very underrated. He also gets hit just over once per 15 minutes on average, which is a very, very low number, very low statistic. So Curtis Blaydes, for the most part, keeps himself safe. He wrestles when he needs to, and he's got good developing and improving striking as well. So with Tom Aspinall, I think that Aspinall's got power behind his strikes. Tom Aspinall's going to have a speed advantage, but I don't think the speed and the power is going to be significant enough against Curtis Blaydes for this fight to be a complete whitewash on the feet. I think Curtis Blaydes is going to be competitive enough on the feet, and then the biggest gap in skill, in my opinion, in this fight is the wrestling and how Tom Aspinall is going to deal with that. If Curtis Blaydes does have a wrestling approach and can't take Tom Aspinall down, then we might see the morale break a little bit of Curtis Blaydes inside the cage. Tom Aspinall takes over, and we get that type of fight that we've seen before. But like I said, I think the striking's close. I think Curtis Blaydes is going to be the bigger, stronger, more athletic fighter with the bigger power in his hands. And I do think, like I said, the striking's developing rapidly. And then you've got the wrestling aspect of this as well, where if it does get a little bit tougher, Blaydes on the feet, he can revert back to the wrestling. Tom Aspinall likely stands up from the takedowns, but then Curtis Blaydes, we've seen over 5 rounds before, he can rinse and repeat those takedowns as well. So I think it's going to be a really close fight, but I just see more towards the edge of Curtis Blaydes in regards to styles and the different disciplines within mixed martial arts. So for that reason, I'm picking Curtis Blaydes to win this fight. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, this is an interesting one. It's supposed to have been Jack Hermansson versus Darren Till. Darren Till, unfortunately, has pulled out due to injury, so we've got Chris Curtis in as a replacement. So we've got Hermansson versus Chris Curtis. I think this is a really, really good fight, and it's a great replacement from the UFC as well. Hermansson, his striking has always been a little bit stiff, a little bit herky-jerky, but a good striker nonetheless. Aggressive, comes forwards, will land hard low kicks, hard punches, and like I said, he has that sort of Nordic attribute into his personality where he'll come forwards, he'll be aggressive, he'll take a punch to give a punch, and because of that he's a fun fighter to watch. But Hermansson, his bread and butter is within the top side grappling. He's got some of the nastiest ground and pound in the UFC. His transitioning as well is beautiful. Once he gets on top and he gets his opponent settled, his transition is beautiful, especially into mount. Then like I said, that ground and pound could start, and he's got good control and good positioning when he's top side as well. And with Chris Curtis, this is what makes it a really interesting fight, because Chris Curtis is predominantly a striker, a boxing heavy striker, a really good striker as well, who's fought southpaw in his last few fights and has really been working shots to the body, putting combinations together. His cardio solid, he's got deceptive power as well, he's quick, he doesn't panic under pressure. But the main thing with Chris Curtis is his takedown defense, because he's such a good striker in regards to that boxing heavy striking that I spoke about. Pretty much every opponent that he tries to fight with, tries to take him down. A lot of these fighters, he's dealt with a few Russians as well, so he's dealt with a lot of takedowns at him, and because of that, at the start, Chris Curtis's takedown defense, he was getting taken down, but, naturally it's got better over time. And we saw in his last fight against Rodolfo Vieira, I think Vieira attempted 20 takedowns against him, didn't take him down once. So his takedown defense is there. He's able to keep fights upright. And this is where I think it's going to be a problem for Hermansson. Now, Hermansson's got, like I said, good aggression. He's got good power, so he could catch Chris Curtis. But the quality of striking is definitely on the side of Chris Curtis. Hermansson's very hittable inside of boxing range, and that's where Chris Curtis really thrives, and he's able to get inside of that boxing range. And when Hermansson shoots for takedowns, I don't think he commits to him as much as what he should. He doesn't have as much conviction in him, I think, is what I'm trying to say. So with Hermansson, he might get Curtis down once, maybe twice at the most, but I think Curtis does a good job of popping right back up to his feet. But that's if Hermansson can actually take Chris Curtis down. Chris Curtis genuinely has really good takedown defense. I think the better moments in this fight take place on the feet, and that's where I think Chris Curtis is the better fighter. The short notice aspect of this and flying all the way over from the States into England is one concern in this fight, but outside of that, I think Chris Curtis is the more well-rounded fighter. I think his defensive wrestling is better than the offensive wrestling of Hermansson. Therefore, Hermansson's best attribute in regards to that top-side grappling is slightly nullified. That means the better moments on the feet better moments in this fight should happen on the feet. That's where I think Chris Curtis is much more efficient, much more effective, and much more dangerous. So for those reasons, I'm picking Chris Curtis to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the current fan favourite in England. We've got Paddy, the Baddie, Pimblett versus Jordan Leavitt. And this is a really interesting fight that the UFC have matched here, because Paddy Pimblett does a lot of his better work on the mat. And that's obviously where Jordan Leavitt specialises. He's a very slick jiu-jitsu fighter, Jordan Leavitt. I think is the best way to describe him. Cardio, definitely a bit of a red flag, a bit of a question mark when fights go later on, and he's had his ground moments and he hasn't been able to submit his opponent, and that's where Jordan Leavitt can sometimes start to then, fade a little bit in the fights. Paddy Pimblett is more of a slow starter, in my opinion, and then builds into a fight. So again, you've not just got, well, it's not a clash of styles, but you've got a clash of type of fighter. Jordan Leavitt, fast starter, fades a little bit later. Paddy Pimblett, slow starter, builds into a fight. And it's going to be really interesting. And these sort of fights, that normally means that if the fighter that starts fast can't get that finish, then the fight is likely going to slip away from him the longer the fight goes. And I'm kind of siding with that aspect of this fight, because I do think that Paddy Pimblett is going to be able to remain safe-ish to a degree. I think there's going to be some very sketchy moments early on, because I do think the fight's going to hit the mat early on. I do think Jordan Leavitt is going to have some time to try and work something, but I think Paddy Pimblett is solid enough on the mat to at least remain safe, let Jordan Leavitt work, let him tire himself out a bit, then maybe try and get back up to the feet and try and take over the fight from that point. So Once the fight is then on the feet, I think that Paddy Pimblett's the better striker. I think he's got the better cardio. He's going to be the fighter that builds into this fight as well. So it all comes down to, can Jordan Leavitt take Paddy Pimblett out early in this fight? And I think he's going to have moments. I think he's going to have opportunities. But ultimately, I think Paddy Pimblett's going to be able to remain safe. So I don't think Leavitt is very likely to take Pimblett out early. And therefore, I have to be siding with Pimblett, coming on strong, using his striking. If Jordan Leavitt does get tired, then Pimblett can get takedowns, get on top of Leavitt and not have to worry about too much danger coming back at him. So I think the longer the fight goes on, which I think it will, the more it favours Paddy Pimblett. And for that reason, I'm picking Paddy Pimblett to win this fight. And in the next fight, another fun one at light heavyweight, we've got Nikita Krylov versus the returning Alexander Gustafsson. And like I said, it's an interesting fight, from a striking perspective. I think Alexander Gustafsson has got some sharp striking. For as tall and rangy as Alexander Gustafsson is, his boxing's very, very good, very crisp, very clean, very accurate. He's patient, good fundamentals, throws a nice straight jab out, straight 1-2 combination as well. So Gustafsson's fundamentals on the feet are really good. And Krylov has actually got a decent karate background as well. He'll throw kicks to the legs, to the body, to the head. And he'll also come forwards with sliding into range, landing strikes, sliding back out of range after he's landed 1 or 2 strikes, maybe 3 strikes in a combination himself. There's not really too much pop on Krylov's strikes, so I think enough to really get too much respect from Alexander Gustafsson on the feet. And then when you look at the grappling, the wrestling and the grappling side, I think that Krylov, if he can get on top of Gustafsson, I think Krylov will be able to do some good work. However, it comes into the fact of the point of trust and how much you can trust Krylov, because he is one of those fighters. I said it in the Paul Craig and Krylov fight that both fighters are relatively untrustworthy because of the way they fight, and that's exactly how it played out. Krylov was on top. He had Paul Craig almost finished, could have finished him in my opinion. And then the thing is with Krylov is he gives up really good positions on the mat, but not only gives up good positions, he also then accepts bad positions from the mistake he made with the good position as well. So it's really difficult to trust Krylov in this fight, even though Gustafsson is definitely, on a decline. He's not the fighter he used to be. He's not a fighter that's in his prime anymore. But the thing is with Gustafsson, I feel like he's declined from one of the best fighters in the division, one of the best fighters in the world, and declined just to your typical ranked 15 fighter, or ranked fighter, should we say. I'm not saying number 15, but just a ranked fighter. So I don't think he's declined to the point he's washed. I just think he's declined from there to the absolute top of the division to just being your typical ranked fighter, which is exactly where Nikita Krylov is at. So I think this fight's going to be relatively close. I think on the feet, Gustafsson's got a slight advantage. With the striking, I think his boxing's a little better than the dynamic striking that Krylov brings with the kicking and mixing in with the boxing. And then when it comes to the grappling, I know it's a cliche, but I genuinely think whichever fighter can be on top position, because let's not forget, Gustafsson's got good takedowns. He's got good top control time himself. And I think if Krylov's stuck under Gustafsson, I think that's exactly what will happen. He'll be stuck under Gustafsson. And I think if Krylov's on top of Gustafsson, Krylov's got the opportunity of a submission, in my opinion. So whichever fighter ends up on top is the fighter that's likely to do better work. And like I said, I know that's a cliche, but then when you look at the wrestling, I think the wrestling of Gustafsson, both offensively and defensively, is better than the wrestling of Krylov. And that's where I'm sort of edging towards Gustafsson here, because I think he's got a slight striking advantage, a slight wrestling advantage, and therefore, because of the wrestling, he should have the grappling advantage as well. So like I said, I do think it's going to be a close fight, just because of where Gustafsson is at, and then how untrustworthy Krylov is. I think it makes a close fight, but I'm edging towards Alexander Gustafsson to get back in the win column in this fight. So I'm picking Alexander Gustafsson to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Molly McCann versus Hannah Goldy. I think this is a good fight for Molly McCann. Molly McCann, when she's got the right stylistic fight in front of her, and when she's just edges her opponent in every single area, she can look absolutely phenomenal. She'll put on a show. She'll get the fans worked up. And I think that's the exact type of fight we've got here. I do genuinely think that the UFC know what they're doing with this type of matchup. I think Hannah Goldy is not going to get completely whitewashed and run through. And that means that the fight's likely going to play out for longer periods. And that's when the fight becomes really entertaining for the fans, because Molly McCann will be playing up to the fans. And that's exactly what I think is going to happen. I think Goldy's going to have her moments in this fight for sure. But I think with Molly McCann, I think her aggression, her forward pressure, her boxing, and the amount of volume that she can put into her striking. This girl's got insane cardio, you know. She's thrown like a 100-punch combination in her last fight, didn't even tire, and then threw another 100-punch combination and didn't tire. Obviously, I'm exaggerating with the 100 punches, but go back and watch that fight if you haven't already. You know, insane volume, insane cardio. But again, against the right opponent, Molly McCann's got decent wrestling. She can get the takedown. She's got decent top side control where she just lays heavy and just chips away, does enough for the referee not to separate them. Hannah Goldy is, you know, a unit herself. You know, she's physically big and strong, and, you know, she's ripped. You can see that. And she's got power. She's got decent head kicks as well. Molly McCann's not going to have everything away this fight. Molly McCann's also going to have to mind her P's and Q's that she doesn't get caught with something tough coming from Hannah Goldy. But outside of Goldy just randomly catching Molly McCann, hurting her and potentially putting her out, I think it's a difficult fight for Hannah Goldy. Molly McCann is a big favourite. I kind of see why she's that big of a favourite, because, like I said, against the right opponent, she's going to look like a phenomenal all-round fighter. I think this is that right opponent for Molly McCann. So I'm picking Molly McCann to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fun one. We've got Paul Craig. It's always a fun one with Paul Craig versus Volkan Oezdemir. And like I just said with Nikita Krylov's breakdown, you know, Paul Craig falls in that category of how much can you actually trust this fighter. But Paul Craig's the opposite of Krylov in regards to, you know, Krylov being in a good position and then ending up in a bad position. Paul Craig's normally in a bad position and ends up pulling a Hail Mary triangle choke or a submission off his back. You know, he's got good dexterity with his legs. He can throw his legs up. He's very flexible. And that's actually a concern with Paul Craig, because you can't always rely on that Hail Mary finish, because at this level in the UFC, Hail Mary finishes just do not come very easily. And this is where I'm edging towards the Volkan Oezdemir side, because Volkan Oezdemir, he's a solid fighter. He's a very good fighter. He only ever loses to the best in the division. And he has lost a lot of fights in the UFC, but the fighters he's losing against, you know, Ankalaev, Yuri Prohaska, and other big fighters in the division, the best fighters in the division. Daniel Cormier was one of the losses. So Volkan Oezdemir has been in there against the best of the best. And he's got a ceiling. You can see that Oezdemir's got a ceiling, but he only ever loses to the best fighters in the division. I don't put Paul Craig in that category. I think Paul Craig's a very good fighter. I think he's a very difficult fighter to deal with, a bit of a nightmare at times. But I feel like someone like Volkan Oezdemir, who's very good all round, he's a great striker, he's got good power, and he's got very good takedown defense as well. And this is why it comes interesting in this fight, because for Paul Craig to take Oezdemir down, I think he's going to have to try and pull guard. That might be his only way to win. And he might succeed in the pulling of the guard, but then Oezdemir's jiu-jitsu isn't phenomenal, but it's definitely solid and good enough to be able to remain safe for a couple of seconds and then stand back up if Paul Craig does pull guard. But pulling guard and then landing a triangle or an armbar or an omoplata or whatever Paul Craig decides to throw off his back, more than likely or typically the triangle, I think it's a low percentage outcome for Paul Craig to try and pull guard on Oezdemir and then submit him straight away, snapping on with that flash submission like I like to call it. I just don't think it's a very likely outcome. I think Volkan Oezdemir is going to come into this fight. I think he's going to be in the face of Paul Craig. I think he's going to land some hard shots early on. I think Volkan Oezdemir is the better striker, the cleaner, crisper striker, especially in boxing range where Volkan Oezdemir prefers to strike. I think he's going to absolutely have his way with Paul Craig. It's just, can Paul Craig clinch up, pull guard and submit him? Like I said, it's possible, but I don't think it's very possible, if that makes sense. I think Oezdemir's takedown defense is going to hold up, and I think he's a much better striker, and that's where the fight is going to likely be finished, or they'll likely play out for the course of 3 rounds. And for that reason, I'm picking Volkan Oezdemir to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Marc Diakiese versus Damir Hadzovic. Marc Diakiese coming off a phenomenal, dominant win against Vyacheslav Borshev. And unfortunately, we aren't getting Marc Diakiese as an underdog again. You know, I think the bookies made a massive mistake. I capitalised on it last time. Admittedly, I knew the game plan. Obviously, we manage Marc. He's a business partner of mine as well with the gym that we opened. And, you know, we work together pretty much every single day outside of camp. So I knew the game plan. I knew what was going to happen. Getting an underdog price on that's phenomenal. And unfortunately, this time, Marc's a big favourite, you know, minus 300, minus 350 in some places. And I kind of get it against Damir Hadzovic. I actually think this is a better stylistic fight for Marc than what it was against Vyacheslav Borshev, because Borshev had that ridiculous deceptive power. And although Hadzovic has got power, by the way, and this is actually something Marc's got to be careful of, mind his P's and Q's and watch out for, because Hadzovic can crack. And, you know, with 4-ounce gloves, it's a mixed martial arts fight at this level in the UFC. One clean punch in the right place can put any fighter out. So it doesn't matter what matchup that is. There's always that puncher's chance. And Damir Hadzovic, his background is in striking. So Marc's got to be careful of that. But outside of Hadzovic cracking Marc and knocking him out, which, you know, Marc's tough. You know, he's not been rocked or hurt too many times. I think that Marc is the better quality striker. I think Marc hits harder as well. So I know I've just spoken about the power of Hadzovic. I think Marc hits harder. He's faster. His movement's better. He's more dynamic on the feet as well. So I think that from a striking perspective, Marc does have Damir Hadzovic trumped a little bit. And then when you look at the wrestling, I think Marc's wrestling is head and shoulders above where Damir Hadzovic is. And the most important thing is I think the offensive wrestling of Marc is better than the defensive wrestling of Hadzovic. We've seen Hadzovic taken down in multiple fights and controlled. And that's exactly what Marc will be able to do as well. And, you know, the corner work of Marc, shout out to McCann. McCann, a phenomenal jiu-jitsu fighter, a phenomenal jiu-jitsu coach as well. So McCann's going to be able to, you know, direct Marc of exactly where to go, what to look for, and how to keep Hadzovic down step by step. So I think Marc's got all the tools in this fight to be able to take Hadzovic down and keep him down. And the reason I'm honing in on that is because that's where Hadzovic's holes have been in previous fights. But I do think that there's going to be a lot of striking in this fight. I think it's going to be a true mixed martial arts fight. We're going to see a little bit of everything. But on the feet, like I said, I think Marc's speed, his movement, how dynamic he is with his striking and the power that he possesses as well, I think he's going to cause Hadzovic problems on the feet. And if the fight does go to the mat, then I think Marc's better there as well. So whichever way I'm seeing this fight, I do think stylistically it's a good fight for Marc. He's just got to mind his P's and Q's, that he doesn't get cracked with something hard from Hadzovic. But outside of getting cracked with something hard, it's hard to see Hadzovic really styling on Marc on the feet. And it's hard to see Hadzovic being able to defend what Borshev had to defend against if that's where Marc decides to take the fight in this particular fight as well. Like I said, it's a good fight for Marc Diakiese. I'm picking Marc Diakiese to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Nathaniel Wood fighting in a new division versus Charles Rosa. And I think this is a really good fight for Nathaniel Wood, if I'm being honest. Charles Rosa's not a fighter that, you know, a lot of fighters run through too easily. He is gritty. He does stay in fights. He is durable. He has got that BJJ, that jiu-jitsu you've got to be careful of and watch out for. So I think that with Charles Rosa, Nathaniel Wood just got to be careful that he doesn't go to the mat and is reckless. And outside of that, I just can't see Charles Rosa winning this fight. Nathaniel Wood, he's got insane cardio, good volume. He's got power in his strikes. He really mixes everything up from his low kicks, his body kicks, and then to his boxing combinations. But not only does he mix things up really well, he blends everything into combinations really well. And like I said, he's got pace and pressure that Charles Rosa normally does succumb against. And I think Rosa's got to try and get this fight down to the mat and get on top and spend good moments on top of Nathaniel Wood. But taking Nathaniel Wood down is going to be difficult because Wood's going to have a speed advantage, a movement advantage. He's going to be cracking Rosa as he's coming in as well. And not just cracking him, but cracking him with combinations. It's just going to make life very difficult for Charles Rosa, in my opinion. So I think that Nathaniel Wood has got a good fight ahead of him here. He's going to be able to rack up volume. He's going to give himself opportunities of knocking Charles Rosa out. I also think he's going to be able to tire Rosa out a little bit. I think the wrestling and the topside grappling could be there for Wood as well. I think Wood's jiu-jitsu is more than good enough to be able to take Rosa down and then remain safe without Rosa throwing up a Hail Mary submission like an armbar triangle or dipping down for a leg and trying to submit him with a heel hook or anything like that. I genuinely think that Nathaniel Wood's got, like I've just said with Marc Diakiese, I think Wood's got a great fight ahead of him here and a fight where he's going to be able to look good in his new division. So I'm picking Nathaniel Wood to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Makwan Amirkhani versus Jonathan Pearce. And this is an interesting fight because Makwan Amirkhani, I think, has got a real solid chance of finishing Jonathan Pearce with these anaconda chokes, the front chokes that Amirkhani's got in his arsenal. And he claims he can set these up like multiple different ways, which I absolutely believe. And Jonathan Pearce has got to be very, very mindful of that in this fight. If Jonathan Pearce gets taken down, I think he can get back up. But then getting back up is where it's going to be dangerous because that's where Amirkhani will keep his eye on the neck and where the head of the opponent is as they're standing back up to the feet. But then for Jonathan Pearce to take Amirkhani down, Pearce does have good takedowns. He's just got to, again, be careful and mindful of that neck, and he's got to get the entries right onto the takedowns, because if the takedowns are telegraphed, if Amirkhani sees them coming, he'll sprawl and target that neck as Jonathan Pearce has attacked with the takedown. However, with all that being said, I'm still leaning towards Jonathan Pearce in this fight, because I think from a striking perspective, I think he's tough, I think he's durable, I think he's gritty. Amirkhani's got decent boxing, but I think that Jonathan Pearce will be able to run through the striking. I think he'll be able to land his own strikes, be very aggressive, push Amirkhani back, work inside the clinch. The strength advantage is going to be difficult in this fight. I kind of think that Jonathan Pearce might have the advantages purely because of the clinch work. I think Jonathan Pearce is going to be better in the clinch than Amirkhani. I think the strength is going to be, I don't think there's going to be too much of an edge. And I think Pearce could potentially get body lock trip takedowns in this fight, and that be the game plan to try and deter those front chokes from Amirkhani. I think that the fight's going to be relatively close. I don't think that it's going to be, I don't think it's reflective of the betting line. You know, if you look at the lines, I think they're slightly too wide. Jonathan Pearce is too big of a favourite in my opinion, but I do get why he is a favourite. Like I said, his youthfulness, his aggression, his pace, his grittiness in this fight, I think is going to be enough to be able to land volume on Amirkhani, look good against Amirkhani. I think he'll be able to score some takedowns and remain safe, keep Amirkhani on his back. And if Amirkhani is just submission hunting, that could be bad for him as well if Jonathan Pearce is just doing good work on top of him. I think as long as Jonathan Pearce stays out of that front choke danger, I think as long as Pearce doesn't shoot a sloppy or lazy takedown, or if Amirkhani gets a takedown, or if Pearce doesn't get up in a lazy way, exposing his neck, I do think that it's a good fight for Jonathan Pearce to look good here against Makwan Amirkhani. So I am picking Jonathan Pearce to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the hype train, the prospect, and the rightful hype train, by the way, Mokaev versus Charles Johnson. And this is a sneaky good fight, this, by the way. Charles Johnson, the flyweight champion over at LFA, or was the former flyweight champion over at LFA. Now he's obviously signed to the UFC. And anybody that doesn't know how the LFA works, it's basically like the Cage Warriors equivalent. If you become a champion in LFA, just like if you become a champion in Cage Warriors, you know you've been battle tested. You know that you've been matched well to give you that good experience to prepare you for the big show to the UFC. And that's the reason why the UFC take pretty much every champion that Cage Warriors have, and they take pretty much every champion that LFA has. So Charles Johnson is battle tested, he's ready, he's been matched really well, he's had tough opponents and he has overcome it, and now he's ready for the big stage. And it's going to be a really interesting fight with Mokaev. The most interesting side of this is from Charles Johnson's striking perspective. His striking is really good. He's fluid, he uses good teep kicks, he's got a good kicking game behind him, and he's really fast, his movement's good as well. So that's where the biggest test for Mokaev is going to be, in my opinion, because Mokaev, his background is within the wrestling, dominant wrestler, good grappler, but his striking is catching up now, and I do think that his striking has got to a level where I don't think fighters like Charles Johnson are going to be able to just completely run through him or even beat him on the feet. I think Mokaev's striking sharp, it's better, it's improved and developed from a couple of years ago. And I think that Mokaev, even though he's got this wrestling background, once his striking really does start coming together, I think he could be a bit of a knockout artist in the flyweight division. And I think that he's going to have power behind his strikes. He's becoming more dynamic, like we saw in his last fight as well. So I think the striking aspect of this fight, I don't think that there's going to be as much of an edge there as what I think Charles Johnson might think. But then when you add the wrestling and grappling into this fight as well, although Charles Johnson is very well-rounded and he does have a good defensive game, I think Mokaev will be able to take him down should he want to. And I think his topside grappling and submission game is going to be a massive threat to Charles Johnson. It's going to be a good fight. I don't think it's going to be a fight that finishes early like the debut of Mokaev. I do think that the UFC fans are going to see more of Mokaev in this fight. I think it is going to go a little bit longer, but I think Mokaev's the better. I think the striking's very close. I'd give the slight edge to Mokaev, maybe just, but the wrestling and the grappling added into it. I think that Mokaev's going to be the better mixed martial artist on the night. I think he's going to have more ways to win. I think he's going to be more dominant, so I'm picking Mokaev to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jai Herbert versus Kyle Nelson. And I think this is a good fight for Jai Herbert, but he definitely has to be careful defensively. I think Jai Herbert is the taller, longer, rangier fighter. I think he's got much better striking. I think he's more dynamic on the feet. He's got power with the sniper straight shots down the middle as well. He mixes everything up well. He uses his kicks. He blends that with the striking. He's got short elbows inside the clinch. His speed, his movement, and the volume that he puts on his opponent. I think Kyle Nelson's going to be in for a long night here, if I'm being honest. However, the one thing that I did say at the start of this side of the breakdown is I think that Jai Herbert's got to be very careful defensively here. And the reason being is because he has been hurt now in multiple fights. It is looking like a big shot could potentially knock Jai Herbert out. And that's just come from being in wars and being hit too much. I think that Kyle Nelson, the one thing that he does have in this fight, in my opinion, is a power advantage, a raw power advantage. I don't think he's got an advantage anywhere else. So Jai Herbert's just got to be careful to not get cracked by anything super hard coming from Kyle Nelson, because Kyle Nelson, although he has that puncher's chance, I think it's a little bit of an exaggerated puncher's chance. I think he's got an opportunity, maybe a small window of opportunity, because it's probably going to have to come earlier rather than later. But he does have the opportunity to knock Jai Herbert out. However, if he doesn't get that knockout or if he doesn't hurt Jai, I think Jai's going to absolutely demolish him in this fight, because he's just the much better striker. If the fight hits the mat, Jai's the better wrestler, the better grappler, the better scrambler. I think he's got submissions as well. So Kyle Nelson, outside of that puncher's chance, is going to be in a very difficult scenario, because, like I said, Jai Herbert's just much better wherever the fight goes, much more dynamic, powerful, cleaner, crisper, sharper, and just better in every aspect of mixed martial arts. I'm always going to side with that type of fighter against the fighter that's got that puncher's chance, even though it is a good puncher's chance. You can't look past Jai Herbert, in my opinion, in this fight, just because in mixed martial arts, every fighter has that puncher's chance. So I'm picking Jai Herbert to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Mandy Bohm versus Victoria Leonardo. And again, I think this is going to be a good fight for Mandy Bohm. Mandy Bohm's got decent striking. She's fought some good level of competition as well. She's got a good all-round game behind her. Now, for Victoria Leonardo, I think that although her striking's okay, definitely where she does a better work is within the wrestling and the topside grappling. And I think she's going to need that to win this fight. And I just don't think Mandy Bohm is going to be able to give up takedowns as easily as what Victoria Leonardo probably needs it to be. I think the defensive wrestling of Mandy Bohm is at least on par with the offensive wrestling of Victoria Leonardo. And that's why I think that the takedowns are going to be very difficult to come in this fight. I'm not saying that Leonardo can't take her down, because Leonardo, she's a grinder, she's gritty, she likes to get close and just make fights ugly and then look for the trip takedowns. But I don't think the trip takedowns are going to, like I said, come that easily. I think Mandy Bohm in a bigger cage as well, she's going to be able to use her range, she's going to be able to distance manage quite well, and I think that she's going to be able to just put a good level of volume and a good striking fight up against Victoria Leonardo, who's probably going to fall short to the striking, because the striking edge, in my opinion, is with Mandy Bohm. The grappling edge is with Victoria Leonardo, but then the wrestling, I think, is quite even from a defensive versus offensive perspective, which leads me to believe that the better work in this fight will take place on the feet in the striking department. That's where I think that Mandy Bohm's the better fighter. So I'm picking Mandy Bohm to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fun one here between Nicolas Dalby and Claudio Silva. And Claudio Silva absolutely needs to get this fight down to the mat to win. You know, it's pretty much the same in every Claudio Silva fight. He can strike, but he's almost like a mini version of Alexei Oleinik in a way, because Claudio Silva's striking, not too much technique behind it, throws big overhands, big bombs, and all that is an aid to close the distance and look for a takedown. And if he doesn't close the distance and get a takedown, and he connects with his opponent, then he's throwing big bombs, and 4-ounce gloves can knock any fighter out. But the thing is, in this fight, and I know this has been a common theme throughout the podcast, but I feel that the defensive wrestling of Nicolas Dalby is going to be more than good enough to deal with the offensive wrestling coming from Claudio Silva, who can get a little bit desperate with his takedowns along the fights go on. And desperation takedowns, they're easier to see come in, they're easier to defend. And I think Nicolas Dalby is experienced and good enough to be able to keep this fight standing. And although Claudio Silva throws those big bombs that I spoke about, and although Claudio Silva is going to be shooting in for takedowns, which could potentially throw the rhythm of striking off of Nicolas Dalby, I think that Nicolas Dalby will be able to just reset really well from these takedowns and just carry on where he left off, opposed to be thinking, oh no, I can't strike because Claudio Silva's going to shoot a takedown again sometime soon. I don't think that'll be the mindset of Nicolas Dalby once he's defended 1 or 2. I think he'll be comfortable in the defense. I think that'll start hurting the morale of Claudio Silva inside the cage. It'll start breaking him a little bit. I think Dalby will come on strong late. I think Dalby's the better striker. I think from a grappling perspective, if he is taken down, he can remain relatively safe, potentially get back up to his feet as well. But I don't think the takedowns will come very easily, and I don't think there'll be too many of them, because I do think the defensive wrestling of Nicolas Dalby is very close, if not better than the offensive wrestling of Claudio Silva. So for those reasons, I'm picking Nicolas Dalby to win this fight. And we get to the final breakdown, the final fight of this episode of the podcast, a fight that only got added just a couple of days ago, giving us 14 fights in total for UFC London on Saturday night. We've got Mason Jones versus Ludovic Klein, and this is a really, really good fight. Mason Jones is an absolute phenom. He's a beast. He's a fighter I'm very, very, very high on. He's got good power. He's got good speed. He's got good cardio. He'll come forwards. He'll eat 3 shots if it means landing 4 of his own. He's just an absolute warrior inside the cage. But then he's also got solid BJJ. He's got good wrestling as well. He's the all-round package, in my opinion. The only knock on Mason Jones, I think he gets hit way too much. I think he does have too much of that mentality. A little bit like Shane Burgos, you look at Burgos last week, his hands were down, he was taking shots, but as long as he's coming forward and firing back himself, he doesn't care. But the shelf life of a fighter like that is very limited compared to a fighter that is defensively aware, and I think that's Mason Jones' only knock. I think if he can keep his hands up and be more defensively aware, I think he turns into a phenomenal fighter and one that could potentially challenge for a title in the future. Against Ludovic Klein, I think Klein was a little bit more hyped than what he should have been coming into the UFC, but he's still a very good fighter, a good kickboxer. He's got good head kicks. His head kicks are set up really well. They're thrown up really fast. But the problem with Klein, and I say this fight after fight, when I break his fights down, his head kick setups are the same. So after he's thrown the same 1-2 combination, followed by the head kick, the reads that you can make on this fighter as an opponent should be relatively simple, and I think Mason Jones will be able to make those reads. But I think Jones is better everywhere here. I think he's more aggressive. I think he's got more power in his strikes. I think his volume's better. His combinations are better. The way he blends his strikes from his kicking to his boxing is beautiful to see. I think his wrestling's going to be better than Klein's. I think his jiu-jitsu is better than Klein's. So I think that it's a really difficult fight for Ludovic Klein, but Klein's that sort of good and dynamic striker that he's going to make this fight phenomenal, because I don't think Mason Jones is going to be able to take Klein out easily, if at all. And because of that, I do think we're going to have a bit of a war here. I think Mason Jones is going to get cracked by a couple of their head kicks. That's going to be sketchy. Those are going to be sketchy moments for Mason Jones. That's where he's got to keep his hands up. But outside of that, I think the way that Mason Jones rips his punches and blends his kicks in, along with blending the wrestling in and his topside jiu-jitsu game, I think he's a complete package, and I do think he's going to have too much for Ludovic Klein on the night. So I'm picking Mason Jones to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. I apologise, it's gone on a little longer than usual, but like I said, we've got 14 fights on the night. 14 fights is an extra 2 or 3 fights breaking down on the podcast than we're used to. Also, I'm buzzing for the card as well, so I wanted to put a little bit of extra juice in there for you as well from an analysis perspective. Again, I appreciate all the subscriptions to the MMA Play 365 YouTube channel. I appreciate all the likes to every single video and all the support that you guys show us. Again, in the comments, drop a comment in, tell me who you're picking, tell me who you're betting. If you are betting on Saturday night, good luck, and I hope you smash the bookies. Until then, I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again next week.